4.7 million years ago, something was walking across the African savanna that wasn't quite an ape and wasn't quite human. And whatever it had no weapons, no shelter, no fire, and no real plan. And the animals that wanted to eat it were everywhere. And the fact that you exist right now means it survived anyway, which raises a question that should genuinely keep you up at night. How? Because when you actually look at what early hominins were dealing with, survival seems almost impossible. Creatures like Australopithecus afarensis, the species that includes the famous fossil Lucy discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, stood roughly 3.5 feet tall and weighed somewhere around 60 to 70 pounds. Their brains were about a third the size of yours. They couldn't outrun a leopard, couldn't outfight a hyena, couldn't climb as efficiently as the chimps they'd recently diverged from, and they were wandering into open grasslands where they were essentially defenseless, exposed, and very much on the menu for every apex predator on the continent. But here's what's fascinating. That vulnerability wasn't a flaw in the design. It was the design. The very pressures that made early hominins so exposed to danger were the same pressures that forced them to develop the tools, the social structures, and the cognitive flexibility that eventually made us the most dominant species on the planet. The savanna didn't try to kill them. It tried to teach them, and most of them learned fast enough to pass the lesson on. Let's start with the body, because the body is where survival always begins. Australopithecus had already made one extraordinary trade roughly 4 to 5 million years ago. It gave up the efficiency of moving on 4 limbs in exchange for bipedalism, walking upright on 2 legs, and at first glance that sounds like a terrible deal. Walking upright is slower than running on all 4s. It exposes your vital organs to attack, and it raises your center of gravity in ways that make you easier to knock down. So why did it happen? The leading theory is thermoregulation. Standing upright in the midday African heat reduces the surface area of your body exposed to direct sunlight by roughly 60%, and it elevates your head above the layer of scorching hot air that hugs the ground, where temperatures can be 10 to 15 degrees Celsius higher than just a meter above it. In a landscape where heat exhaustion could kill you before a predator even got the chance, being able to stay active at midday while every other large predator was resting in the shade was an enormous competitive advantage. And then there was food. The forests that earlier ape ancestors had relied on for soft, easy fruits were shrinking as the African climate became cooler and drier across the Pliocene epoch, and the hominins who couldn't adapt to the new open environments simply died out. The ones who survived had to eat things they'd never eaten before. Tough roots, fibrous tubers buried underground, seeds, grasses, and eventually meat. The fossil record shows us this shift clearly in the teeth. Earlier hominins like Ardipithecus, dating to around 4.4 million years ago, still had relatively large canines and forest-adapted dental structures. But by the time you reach Australopithecus africanus and the robust Australopithecines like Paranthropus boisei around 2.5 million years ago, you see massive flat molars and powerful jaw musculature specifically evolved for grinding the kind of hard, gritty, low-nutrition food that nobody would choose to eat unless the alternative was starvation. These weren't dietary preferences. They were survival adaptations written directly into bone. But food wasn't just about what you could grind between your teeth. The real revolution came when early hominins started processing food before it entered their mouths, and that's where tools enter the story. The oldest stone tools currently known, found at a site called Lomekwi 3 in Kenya, date to approximately 3.3 million years ago, which means some species of hominin was deliberately chipping rocks to create sharp edges long before the genus Homo even existed. These Oldowan tools, which appear in the archaeological record at Nyayanga on Kenya's Homa Peninsula around 2.9 million years ago, were simple by any modern measure, just a stone flake knocked off a larger core, but they were transformative. A sharp stone flake lets you access the dense caloric payload locked inside a large animal carcass, the marrow inside the long bones that no other primate on the savanna could reach. Cut marks on animal bones from sites dating to 2.6 million years ago show clear evidence of hominins butchering carcasses, and the pattern of those marks tells researchers that, in many cases, hominins were getting to the animal first, before the hyenas, which means this wasn't just opportunistic scavenging. It was something closer to active competition with the most dangerous carnivores in Africa. Now you have to understand what it actually meant to compete with hyenas and lions for a carcass on the open savanna. Because it wasn't a quiet, solitary activity. It required numbers, noise, and coordination. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer groups and making comparisons to early hominin behavior have consistently found that the single most important survival factor wasn't individual strength or speed or even intelligence. It was group cohesion, a band of 20 to 30 individuals moving together, communicating, sharing information about where food and water could be found, and collectively defending against predators, had survival rates that were exponentially higher than isolated individuals or small family units. This is the pressure that drove the development of increasingly sophisticated social behavior. And social behavior is what eventually drove the expansion of the brain itself, because navigating complex social relationships, remembering who cooperated with you and who didn't, predicting what others would do, tracking alliances across a group of dozens of individuals, all of that requires serious cognitive horsepower. Here's what we lost when we stopped thinking about these early hominins as primitive. They weren't primitive. They were solving genuinely hard problems with almost no resources, and the solutions they developed reshaped human biology permanently. The hominin hand, with its uniquely opposable thumb and the fine motor precision it allows, didn't evolve by accident. It co-evolved with tool use over millions of years of selection pressure, meaning that the bodies of your ancestors were literally being rewritten by their behavior, with individuals who could grip and throw and flakestone more accurately surviving at higher rates and passing those traits on to the next generation. Water was its own crisis. The savanna offers water unpredictably, and early hominins had to range over territories of potentially hundreds of square kilometers to find reliable sources, which is one reason researchers believe early hominins developed some of the earliest forms of spatial memory and wayfinding that eventually underpinned all of human navigation, geography, and eventually cartography. Sites like Kangera in Kenya show evidence of hominins returning repeatedly to the same locations near water sources over extended periods, suggesting a level of territorial knowledge and planning that goes far beyond what most people imagine when they picture these early ancestors. And the predators never stopped. Leopards, saber-toothed cats, the enormous short-faced hyenas of the Pliocene, giant crocodiles near every water source, venomous snakes underfoot. Every single day was a negotiation between need and risk, between the calories you had to find and the danger you had to cross to reach them. Your ancestors made that negotiation successfully, generation after generation, for millions of years, in the dark, without fire for most of it, without language as we understand it, building the social bonds and cognitive architecture that would eventually produce everything that came after.